Welcome to Electric Perspectives, a podcast that explores the innovations and policies shaping the electric power industry and how America's electric companies are delivering the resilient clean energy we need to strengthen America's energy security and power our daily lives. This show is brought to you by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. I'm your host, Brian Reel.
On today's show, we're thrilled to be joined by Tyler Anthony, President and CEO of Pepco Holdings, who will discuss ongoing efforts to strengthen the energy grid and to build the workforce that will support the rapid growth of electricity demand from AI and data centers. We'll also talk about the partnerships that are essential to delivering a secure and resilient energy future, as well as efforts to keep customer bills as low as possible. Tyler, thank you for taking the time to share your perspective with us on these important energy issues.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's great to be here.
And to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I've spent over 3 decades in the energy industry with more than 20 years in nuclear, and I have 15 on the T&D side of the business. That perspective has shaped how I approach this role at Pepco Holdings, where we serve more than 2 million customers across Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and here in Washington, D.C., including some of the country's most critical government and institutional facilities. Honestly, we take that responsibility very seriously at Pepco. It's an honor to serve this area. Our mission, obviously, to deliver safe, reliable, and affordable power to these communities. That includes ensuring continuity for the institutions that keep our region and, frankly, our nation running. But we're doing all of this at a time when the energy landscape is undergoing, frankly, unprecedented change. The last 5 years, we've seen more transformation than in the last 50. And from the rapid growth of data centers and electric vehicles to the impacts of climate change and evolving customer expectations, our grid is under more pressure than ever. And at the same time, exciting opportunities are emerging. We're seeing a resurgence of interest in clean, firm generation like nuclear. I'm looking forward to talking more with you about how we're responding to surging demand, especially from areas like artificial intelligence and data centers, how we're investing in grid modernization to prepare for what's ahead, and how we're building the workforce needed to power this transformation in a way that's equitable and lasting.
So as you noted, the rapid growth of AI and data centers is leading to accelerating grid transformation. At the same time, industry is navigating a rising electricity demand, extreme weather events. How is Pepco developing long-term plans to power its communities in the face of all of these sometimes competing challenges?
Yeah, great question. We're really at an inflection point. The convergence of AI, data center growth, electrification, and extreme weather is transforming the energy system faster than anything I've seen in my 30-plus years in the industry. As an example, utility-scale battery storage in the United States is poised to more than double over the next 2 years and will close out 2026 at nearly 65 gigawatts. You put that in perspective, it's a rapid rise from the 17 gigawatts in the first quarter projected of 2024. And a gigawatt's roughly equivalent to building an entire nuclear power station. At Pepco, we're focused on energy security. As older baseload resources retire and new energy comes online, we've retired all the fossil generation in New Jersey. We've just retired the last fossil plant in Delaware here in December of last year. And that just means the need for renewables to continue on system as we build these larger baseload resources. We're also advocating for market and policy reforms that ensure large-scale users like data centers pay their fair share and that customers aren't left shouldering the costs of rapid transformation. On that note, both Pepco and Exelon support co-location of data centers with energy generation. I see that as a key part of the solution, but it has to be done responsibly. We need to make sure it doesn't drive up costs for residents and small businesses, while also helping position the U.S. to lead in the global race for AI. This is all about national security, and it's about striking the right balance between growth and accountability, innovation, and equality. I'd also emphasize that as long as we're working together, utilities, policymakers, regulators, as well as our partners in labor, in our communities, we can solve these issues and continue to advance improvement to the grid. I can't stress enough the importance about partnerships. This moment calls for urgency, but also discipline. We can move fast and still do it the right way.
As a Pepco customer, I often hear mention of the Capital Grid project. Can you tell us a little bit more about this project and why now is the time to be implementing these sort of investments?
Yeah, appreciate the question. When you think about Capital Grid, I mentioned the importance of partnerships. I'll give you a little background. When it comes to DC, we were faced with, aging infrastructure, capacity, resiliency, and the Capital Grid kind of pulled all of the partnerships together to essentially had a foundation with our stakeholders to put a $1.6 billion investment in the future of energy in DC. It's going to serve as a springboard to our long-term strategy to enhance the electric grid here in DC. It serves as a hub for the ongoing downtown resupply program. The project was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to our employees to work on something that transforms for our customers, our communities, and our partners. It essentially takes 230 kV underground, north and south, essentially 25 feet in the ground, across the entire District of Columbia, networking to 230, increasing capacity, and replacing aged infrastructure. The Capital Grid started in 2016, and we're fastly coming to the conclusion now that we've embarked on the last substation here at Champlain.
And on a broader level, how is your company thinking about managing this grid modernization with energy supply costs and also the focus on keeping customer bills as low as possible?
Yeah, that's the balance, Brian. When you think about the balance of the importance to make the necessary infrastructure investments for the reasons we discussed, but yet have the balance around affordability. Frankly, there's no decision that we will not make that asks two fundamental questions. What's the customer benefit and what's the priority? When it comes to Capital Grid, I can't stress enough about those partnerships. One in particular has to deal with our commission. Our commission here in DC have been great partners. We've had the opportunity to improve the reliability in the District of Columbia greater than 50% on my tenure here, and we couldn't do it without the partnerships, like I said, with the Commission and labor and others.
I saw the recent news that Exelon, which is the parent company of Pepco, announced a $50 million charitable contribution that will be administered to local nonprofits by Pepco as well as the other 5 local operating companies that are part of the Exelon family. Can you talk more about Pepco's Customer Relief Fund and your role with this program and how it will assist customer with payment assistance, especially as we go into summer months? This definitely seems timely.
Brian, this is one of the reasons I'm so proud to work for Exelon. When you think about, I'll use the word trust. We spend a great amount of time in communities, in our performance, when the lights go out, in our response to build a level of trust. And what we've seen across the different jurisdictions as these supply costs have increased our customers' bills significantly. And Exelon kind of sat back with the different utilities like Pepco and said, what more can we do? What more can we do to be a part of that solution? And this was just a step in that direction to say to our customers, we're here for you. We're part of that broader community. It's very important that we show up when our customers are in need in any way that we can. And this is just another step in that direction to build that trust with our community and our customers.
With this focus on ensuring customer bills are as low as possible, what other sort of things are you doing throughout the organization?
Brian, this is probably the number one issue facing our industry, facing Exelon, facing Pepco. It's around affordability of the bills. We're taking it very seriously. Earlier we talked about our relief fund, which is a big step in the right direction. However, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes on trying to drive these costs down. I'll speak about 4 areas that we're focused on currently. One is the reforms on the supply side with PJM about how we keep this dispatchable resources available and low cost. The second, frankly, is our internal costs. How do we maintain our internal costs as low as possible? How do we get the most out of every dollar we spend, whether it's internally or with our supply contracts, and how we're managing this inflation in the different pieces? Third, let's talk about the customer. We're trying the best we can to educate the customer. The best example of that I have would be our My Account, where customers can get weekly and daily updates on the energy they're using, how it compares, how much they're spending by dollars, just to keep them more active because, nobody wants the surprise of a bill twice the size. Here we are in the district looking at temperatures next week getting to more close to 100 degrees. That means more energy to run those air conditioners. And we have to have the opportunity to keep customers informed and help them manage their energy. And then the fourth and final area, has everything to do with what we're working with our regulators and our partners, whether these are energy efficiency programs that we have going, these energy efficiency audits, what we're doing around rate structure for low to moderate income, how we're focusing on the different LIHEAP and the federal programs, how we're connecting customers to those programs, and then, and on top of that have to do, here with what we've recently announced with the relief fund, but clearly a number one issue for us in the industry.
And for listeners who may not be familiar with PJM or how energy supply purchased in the open markets impacts bills, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, Brian. So when customers get their energy bills, usually the bill is split between what we provide, which is the transmission and distribution of energy to your homes, and then there's the supply cost, which frankly we're agnostic to, and we do that pass-through based on what we buy it on the open capacity market for customers. And that helps drive the total bill, if you will. And what's happened in our industry is that it's a unique situation. We often talk about AI and data centers and the need for that increased power. And frankly, it's a national security issue. We want these data centers and we want this infrastructure built onshore. So that has caused the need and increased demand for these large dispatchable units and power plants. Okay, and then we have a compounding effect where we had a lot of our fossil plants, these have been, highly sought after because in a lot of cases they're heavy carbon polluters. And it's been a good thing to take these units offline because of their damage to the environment. When it comes to these older units, frankly, in many cases, these units were actually old. Some date as far back as between the 50s to the 1970s. And frankly, they're very high cost to run. So this was an economic as well as an environmental benefit to start bringing some of these older units offline. Now, I can appreciate we need the power and we need to replace that power. But what's happened in the service territories I represent and to the country somewhat at large is the fact that the renewables have not come online as we anticipated. For example, in states that I represent in Maryland and New Jersey, we were quite aggressive trying to get offshore wind in place. Whether it comes to the larger solar facilities and the permitting and requirements, frankly, the renewables have not come on fast enough. The fossils have retired in many cases. And then the compounding of AI has just made an untenable market. And like I had mentioned earlier, the work we're doing with the PJM and as an industry to build these units, get these renewables on. Frankly, Brian, I'm an all of the above strategy. I think we do need new nuclear. I think we need combined cycle gas to help bridge us for the next several years. And we have to continue to put the renewables on because they do play a vital role as well.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. Sense is transforming grid intelligence using next-gen AMI 2.0 meters, analyzing microsecond-level data to deliver real-time insights. More reliability, more efficiency, more visibility. Supercharge your operations with software built for the future. Visit sense.com/utilities. That's Sense, sense.com/utilities. And with current energy costs and the advancements in both capabilities and deployment of battery storage, what do you see the economics looking like over the short term, say like 5 to 7 years?
Well, when you think about it, Brian, when we talk about the need for new nuclear, we talk about the need for baseload gas combined cycle. We're heavily in construction in many areas across the country, and many plans are happening. But, frankly, some of those impacts are a few years away. Just trying to get combined cycle turbines in the queue for production, et cetera. But I would tell you, in the current PJM most of the new energy is coming from renewables, mostly your solar and your wind. So I personally believe that battery storage for the next time period, let's say from now to the next 3 to 5 years, is critical. Large battery storage is going to take those renewable investments and make them dispatchable. You know, the best analogy I could give is if you think of a Costco parking lot, and a Costco parking lot has 500 parking spots. You may not need that. You might have 10 cars in there on a Monday morning, 50 cars on a Tuesday, but come Saturday morning, you need all 500 spots. And to me, battery storage builds that capacity, so those 4 or 5 hours when you need that energy, it's there for you, and it can make those renewables more dispatchable. And I personally feel that that's the bridge to get us to these installed large units in construction, whether it be nuclear or gas.
To look a bit more at the resilience upgrades, those are one part of the equation for building a reliable and secure energy future. Another part is supporting the next generation workforce that will operate and maintain this grid infrastructure. Can you talk about Pepco's approach to workforce development?
Yeah, to start with the question, as I think about it, one of the things I can't stress enough is the importance of the workforce that we need in order to maintain and operate this system, and the complexities that we're experiencing, the changes of the grid, two-way power flows, and the energy workers of the future couldn't be more critical to our success. So how is Pepco and Exelon facing that? We're taking a comprehensive, frankly, equity-first approach to workforce development at Pepco. It's not just about the job, it's about the transforming the communities, and it's also about meeting people where they are and result in family-sustained careers. When I talked about the $1.6 billion investment in capital grid here the last 10 years, all of that money goes to local residents that are local workers, and that money comes and basically supports our community. And at Pepco, we're integrating new and emerging technologies directly into the workforce. When you think about AI, cybersecurity, demand response integration, smart grid tools. So whether you're the technician out in the front line, or you're the engineer or the data scientist, all are critical. We've included things such as targeted boot camps for system operators and field technicians with some of our local university, hands-on internships, partnerships with local colleges. We have an all-of-the-above strategy on how we're collectively going after the best and brightest for this industry. And frankly, we're not doing it alone. It's collaboration. I mentioned unions earlier. The labor unions, the school districts, community colleges. This ensures our workforce isn't just prepared, but frankly empowered to lead. And at the heart of it, we're rethinking the model, moving from a traditional craft-centric system to a flexible, technology-driven one. That means integrating skills like I'd mentioned, cybersecurity, distributed energy management, and data analytics. It means ensuring the people shaping tomorrow's grid reflect the communities we serve today.
Are there any specific workforce development partnerships that are helping to create new pathways into energy careers?
I'll tell you one that I'm extremely proud of. It has to do with our partnership with D.C. government and Mayor Bowser. One of our most impactful programs is the D.C. Infrastructure Academy, where our Pepco utility training program has already graduated almost 300 individuals. Now, about 40% of those individuals have been hired from us, and the remaining 60% are hired by our partners. These are good, sustaining career jobs in our field. And frankly, it's a program I'm incredibly proud of. When you get to talk to these technicians, we're changing lives and we're changing families. We couldn't do this work. I mentioned also that the partnership about IBW. Can't stress enough, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Jerry Wilford here at Local 1900, he gives his personal cell phone number to each candidate for coaching and mentorship. And these leadership commitments to training next generation of our skilled tradesmen have been essential to everything from safety and technical excellence to building a more inclusive energy workforce. And when it comes to Line Worker Appreciation Day, it's just around the corner. It's actually a great moment just to say thank you to the men and women who put their lives on the line, often quite literally, to keep the lights on. We're proud to work alongside them every day and keep investing in the talent and training that powers our future.
And you talked about creating opportunities here in the local communities. There really is a need with the growth here, and you have some retirements of the workforce. There's a lot of opportunities.
That's so true. In many of the jurisdictions we operate in, we're one of the largest employers of the area. And I think people kind of miss that at times, where we're an economic engine for the community. We're an economic engine for jobs. And when you think about our industry and the exciting times I had mentioned, we have needs for project managers, technicians, field technicians, engineers, and then even in the non-technical programs, our customer area, our communications, there's a big need in our industry. And frankly, we like to keep local. We like to hire local, work with local communities, because we see ourselves as that viable economic engine as a part of our role in the communities. And the need for trained and qualified individuals is going to make the difference. I had said in the last 5 years, I've seen more development in this industry in the last 30. And I believe in the next 5, we're going to see another transition where this high technical skill set is needed. I find myself now dealing with different data scientists, how we're mining the data that we have back to the primary goal of low cost, high reliability, high safety, high affordability.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today to really walk through the investments you and your team are leading for grid enhancements here in the DC area.
Yeah, Brian, in closing, this is an exciting time, whether it's the technology, whether it's the onset of demand, whether it's our workforce. This is a phenomenal time to be in the industry, and it was great to have a talk with you today. Thank you.
That's our show for today. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about EI's members and the electric power industry, visit our website at electricperspectives.com.